Hey, well, welcome to Crossing Church and the sermon for this week heading into May. I wanted to start off by talking about fads, because fads are those things that are popular for a little while and then they go away. You know, like Cabbage Patch dolls and Beanie Babies. Some of you may still have some Beanie Babies around. They were real popular for a while. Tickle Me Elmo. Um, some things I guess are still around, but like Red Bull and Monster drinks, I've never actually had those, but um, they just seem like chemicals in a can to me. Although I'm fine with Coke. Uh, but anyway, you know those were real big, and everybody's the thing to drink or whatever, and now it's like yeah, I guess whatever. But stuff tattoos even. Um, Nothing against people with tattoos, but it used to be the thing that you'd have to set yourself apart from the crowd. And now you get a tattoo just to fit in. Like everybody else has it. I'm like the weird guy who's just got skin. But that's what comes with fads. They're really big. Everybody's gonna have a nose ring. And then it's like, oh, you've got a nose ring too. Um, and then you're like, yeah, and eventually maybe you take out the nose ring because, well, it was exciting for a time and it was kind of a cool thing, but now I'm not all that interested in it. Fads, they come and they go. Some of you may have worn bell bottoms back in the 60s, 70s, Um, they were that's what everybody was doing. Everybody's wearing bell bottoms. You may have had different, I had long hair back in the 80s and the 90s. Um, that was just the thing. You listen to that kind of music, rock music, and you grow your hair out long. Just something I wanted to do, and now I look back and people would call that a fad. It was something that was popular for a while, and then it went away. Crossing church mugs. They were huge in like 2009, 2010. But now we got boxes full of them. If you want one, let me know. But things that are really exciting and big for a while, and then kind of the excitement goes away. They were just a fad, and today I wanted to talk about the fact that 2,000 years ago in Judea, for a lot of people, Jesus Christ was a fad. He was a person who came along that people got really excited about for a while, truly. Energetic and enthusiastic, and where is he and where's he going? Let's follow him and let's see what he's going to do today. And they were really big on Jesus for a while. And then what we're going to look at today is there was really a big turning point. And this is one of those, a real big turning point in Jesus' ministry, when he's been going around. He's in his second year of ministry here, 2 out of 3 years, and people are excited about him, rightfully so. He's healing and he's doing these miracles, as John calls them, signs. He's just fed all these people bread and fish out of next to nothing. And so they're following him around across the lake, they want to make him king. They're so excited about him. They think he should be king. And then we're going to see today they turn away. They're done with him. That was a fad. For some of them, it was just, it was that thing, that maybe even now they're embarrassed to, admit that I was into Jesus, I went into that too. And Jesus is left standing there basically saying, like, was it something I said? Yes, Jesus, it was. And that's what we looked at last week, and we'll talk a little bit more about it here today. But let me catch you up. We're in John chapter 6. If you've got your Bible, go ahead and get that open to chapter 6 or on your phone. We're going to be reading verses 59 through 71 today, and then looking back a little bit, getting some context for it. But I want to start in John chapter 6, verse 59. Yes, it was something Jesus said, and that's why all these people walked away. And what are we going to do with what he said? And that's the real question. But in verse 59 it says, these things he said in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. We're going to go back here in a second and look at what things he said. Therefore many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, this is a hard saying. Who can understand it? When Jesus knew in himself that his disciples complained about this, he said to them, does this offend you? What then if you should see the Son of Man ascend where he was before? It is the Spirit who gives life, the flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak to you are spirit and they are life. But there are some of you who do not believe. For Jesus knew from the beginning who they were who did not believe and who would betray him. And he said, therefore I have said to you that no one can come to me unless it has been granted to him by my Father. From that time, many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more. That was it. They were done. They weren't wearing bell bottoms again. They were getting rid of those beanie babies. This fad was over, this fad with Jesus. Then Jesus said to the 12, "Do you also want to go away?" But Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Also we have come to believe and know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered them, "Did I not choose you, the 12? And one of you is a devil." He spoke of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for it was he who would betray him, being one of the 12. So this is a big moment, and not only are thousands, it's not just that thousands of looky-loos walked away. It's not only that, but many of them had been following him. Many of them may have very well have been disciples. In Luke chapter 10 talks about Jesus sending out 70 disciples. So he had his 12, and then he had a bigger group than that. And there's a point where he sends out 70 of them to go and cast out devils and heal the sick and preach the good news of the kingdom. And they go and they do it, and these are the group that return and say, "Hey, the demons, bow down or whatever, in your name." And Jesus is like, "Oh, don't get excited about that, but that your name is written in the book of life." And could it be that some of them are in this group who now turn away? Because Jesus turns around to the 12. It's not that he turns around to his 70. There's a good chance many of them have now said, "That's it." That's unsettling, and it should be, to think that people could be that close to Jesus that they're healing devils, casting out devils. They're not healing devils. They're casting them out, and they're healing the sick. And they're doing these things, and then at some point going, I'm not with this guy anymore. This is a big moment, okay? Judas isn't the only betrayer, if you will, in the Gospel of John. I'm kind of getting a little ahead of myself here, but Judas betrays him. But how much less does the crowd who chooses Barabbas, how much less do they betray him? How much less this crowd that now turn away and refuse to continue to follow him and refuse to be witnesses of him? To what degree did they betray also? So this is a huge moment in Jesus' ministry. 59, these things he said in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. Therefore many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, "This is a hard saying. This is a difficult saying. Who can understand it?" Let me just go back a little bit and remind us of what it was that he said in verse 53. Okay, this is chapter 6, verse 53. It said, Jesus said to them, "Most assuredly," so I mean this, is what that says. This is the truth. "I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you." Okay, that got people's attention. "Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He who eats my flesh," he's still going on about it. "He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread which came down from heaven, not as your fathers ate the manna and are dead. He who eats this bread will live forever." And this whole thing was really throwing people. If they took it literally, then that's just really weird. But some of them must have been taking this literally. And but I talked about last week. He's really getting in. He's really about abiding. That's what it's all about. It's about feeding off of him spiritually. He's offering spiritual nutrition. And that's what he's on about. Feeding his flesh and his blood. It's really about it's a spiritual sustenance that he's offering us, abiding in him. So that's really what Jesus' whole ministry is about. Certainly as John focuses in on it. And the crowd missed this. Now what gets me about this crowd is that they're willing to turn away now. He said the thing about the flesh and the blood, and we're out of here. Here's what gets me. Nobody's hanging out, at least there's no record of it, nobody's hanging out with follow-up questions. Like, should we take that literally? Or is this a metaphor? Is this one of those spiritual things that you don't mean literally, Jesus, like Pastor Dave's always saying? Yes, he could have said, if anybody had bothered to ask any follow-up questions. I remember back in college, I'm 20, 21, 22, and I'm sitting in college classes. I was getting a business degree, if you can believe it or not. And I have the degree. It's a piece of paper. Uh, anyway, I didn't pursue that, but I'm sitting there in like business English, business grammar, business English. Tells you how much I remember about it. Don't know the name of it, but and I don't know which one is proper to say. Sitting in a class like that, and I'm in my early 20s, and I don't care. I don't care what I'm supposed to use, whether it's a semicolon or a comma. In this case, give me the piece of paper. I'm like everybody else in the class is with me on this. Okay, it's not just that I had some bad attitude. Everybody's there because it's required for the degree, and what we want is a piece of paper that's going to let us get on with our lives so we can go make some money. That's how it was supposed to work. So anyway, so we're sitting in this class, most of us in our early 20s, just going, oh, let's get through this. And there was always a return student, some old man in his mid 40s, like me now, some old guy or gal, and it happened in seminary too. They got even older then, and they come back in their 50s and their 60s, and they've tried life, and now they want to come back to school and try something different. And so they're getting a business degree, and they're probably actually going to do something with it. But they've come back, and now the rest of us are sitting in class for an hour and a half. We're done. We're so done. We want to go. We want to take a nap. We want to go get something to eat. We're done with this silly business, English, whatever it is. Quit talking so we can all get out of here. And what happens? You can count on it every time. The return student has a follow-up question. I don't really understand how the semicolon such and such. None of us understand, and we don't care. We don't want to hear any more about it. Don't you understand, return student? Or is this just something that happens when you get old? You start asking questions so that we have to sit here and be tortured longer. The real deal was, of course, being a little older, being a little wiser now, that return student was interested in knowing more about it. They knew that there was more to it. They knew that to have true understanding, they couldn't just leave it at simply all that the teacher said. There was more to know. And it would require asking questions. And so the return students get it. That would be me now, probably. If I went back to seminary or something like that again, I'd be the guy who'd say, hey, can we talk a little more about this? And the 20-year-olds would be, rolling their eyes. Does this guy want to get out of here? This crowd had no return students, if you will. Nobody there saying, hey, hold on, you guys, don't take off just yet. We haven't asked him any questions. We haven't given him a chance to follow up on what he was saying and to let us know, to give us understanding. We haven't even asked a follow-up. That blows my mind about this crowd, but that's exactly what happened there with them. They weren't willing to dig any deeper, and that's another sermon in and of itself. But so often in the Christian faith, we've got to dig deeper, and to understand the scriptures, so much is under the surface, and we've got to dig to get there. But these people were unwilling to dig, and so Jesus then says in verse 61, when Jesus knew in himself that his disciples complained about this, so his own 12, as well as the ones who leave, are not getting what he said and are a little, upset about this. Like, what is he talking about? He said to them, does this offend you? What then if you should see the Son of Man ascend where he was before? And to kind of condense this down, I think a lot of the people in the crowd may have used the flesh and blood thing as a cop-out, as a cover-up for the real issue. That wasn't the real issue. It was an offensive statement that would be easy to say, oh man, he started talking about cannibalism, so we left. Really, the big issue that he said that was offensive, and it's offensive throughout the Gospel of John, is that he came from the Father, that he, in the beginning, was with God and was God. That's the offensive statement. It's not this thing about, and I thought more about it this week, it's not just simply that he was talking about what seemed to be cannibalism and people didn't understand. That's an easy out. Have you ever had something you didn't want to be a part of anymore, and you're just looking for that out? And when it comes, suddenly it's a big deal because it's your out. I think this was the out for a lot of people. And the real offense that they were having was that this guy was God, saying he was God himself, that he'd always been God from the beginning. The same, that, meaning for them that he was Yahweh, that he was there, the pillar of fire by night, like Steve talked about a few weeks ago. That was him there. He was there. He was the creator. And they're not they're like, the fish and loaves thing was pretty amazing, but you're going a little far, right? And that's the real offense, and it's still the offense today. That Jesus is God. There are plenty of groups, religions even, major world religions that will accept Jesus as part of their part of the equation. In Islam, Jesus is a prophet, which is a great bridge for discussion with Muslims. That he was a great prophet, so they believe many of the stories about him. But the line is, he's not God. Allah is one, and so you can't go there that he was God, and so that's the line of offense. And it's the same with Jehovah's Witnesses, who changed that up. That first line of John, they changed that up. He was with God and he was a God. Get an A in there, and now it's less offensive because he's just another one of a bunch, and so that's okay because he's not the God. I mean, who's that? But Jesus, that was his claim. I have come from the Father. I have always been with him, and I come down. I am God. And so I think that's really the offensive statement that people were struggling with here. And if they just asked some follow-up questions, if they bothered, and I think it just showed that the crowd were excited one day to make him king, and then the next day they're not bothered to even ask a follow-up question to get some understanding. They just walk away. So in verse 63, we're going to get in some good stuff here. It is the Spirit who gives life, the flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak to you are spirit, and they are life. So Jesus is letting them know. Again, I'm speaking to you in spiritual terms, as Paul talks about to the church in Corinth. These things can only be understood by the Spirit. These are spiritual matters. But there are some of you who do not believe. For Jesus knew from the beginning who they were who did not believe and who would betray him. And he said, therefore, get this, therefore I have said to you that no one can come to me unless it has been granted to him by my Father. Now, what in the world does that mean? No one can come to me unless it has been granted to him by my Father. Does it mean, as many believe, many Christians believe, that this means that God chooses the people who will believe in him? Because Jesus just said no one comes to him unless it's been granted to him by the Father. So while Jesus can go out and say a lot of things, it's really up to God then to say this one, that one, not that one, that one can come to me, that one can come to me, not that one can come. And there are other verses. This isn't a lone verse. There are other verses that would seem to point to the same thing. The issue then is that the book of John puts the burden of belief on the individual. And so as you go through the whole thing, the whole point of the book is to persuade people to believe in Jesus. So here's what happened. Here are the signs. Here's what they mean. Do you believe? And then it also puts the consequences. There are consequences for believing and not believing. And I think we right to question then, well, is it fair of God to do the choosing and then give consequences for something he chose, right? So you will not receive eternal life. I've decided this before the foundations of the earth. I've decided that yes, no. And you're also going to, you will be judged because you didn't believe. But, and rightfully, wouldn't that person say, but you're the one who decided I couldn't believe, that I'm not to be one of the... And so, that whole system of thought runs into some real snags. And there are plenty of other scriptures that can help point that out too. Jesus wept over Jerusalem, Matthew 23. Jesus is weeping over the thought of what's going to happen to Jerusalem when they're destroyed by the Romans. And he says, how long I've wanted to gather you like a hen gathers her chicks under her arms. I've wanted to protect you and provide for you like a mother hen. But, he says, you were unwilling. So the burden is on the people who are unwilling. He doesn't say anything there about, but God, my Father just keeps choosing some and not choosing others. And I come preaching to everybody, and then, it's your fault they won't believe. There's nothing like that, is there? Jesus is weeping over a group of people who refused to choose him. It was their choice, and they were unwilling. Clear, right? On the other hand, you look through the Old Testament in particular, but you find it in the New as well. God chooses people all the time. It's like his favorite pastime is choosing some and not choosing others. He chooses Abraham. You are going to be the start of this nation. And Abraham could have been like, who, me? Yeah, sure, you. Not this guy? No, not that guy. I'm choosing you. And then, and I choose this nation, Israel, not Egypt, not Babylon, not anybody else around this planet. I choose this group. And in so choosing this group, I'm unchoosing or dischoosing or not choosing the rest of you, right? Only one nation got to know God in that way. That was God's choice. He chooses Joseph to be the favorite son, the favored one, who will have the dreams and then interpret dreams. And that's God's picking. He chooses, they want a king. Israel want a king, and so he chooses a king for them, Saul. Saul wasn't running for office. There was no campaign for king. Saul versus the other guy. God just says, I'm going to pick one for you. You want a king, I disagree, but here you go. Here's Saul. Saul didn't work out. Okay, you need another king. Let me choose another one for you. Here's David, son of Jesse. God chooses the king. In this passage, Jesus chooses, he says, did I not choose you, the 12? Who chose the 12 disciples? Did they choose to be disciples? Yeah, kind of, after he chose them. Okay, and so we've got that. Saul, who then becomes Paul, is very much against the church and is choosing to persecute them. And God says, I pick you. I'm picking you out of this crowd of, Pharisees and others who are against me, to come to faith. And so he reveals himself to Saul and chooses him. And so we've got all of that now to say, where you want to give an easy answer to say, well, we believe. It's not, we do the choosing around here. God doesn't choose people. That's ridiculous. Look at all these reasons against it. And then you go through the same scriptures and you find all great reasons to believe why God chooses. All that to say, this is one of those moments. This is one of those times when if you're looking to Christianity for easy answers, or if you're looking to the scriptures even to say, okay, this has all the answers, right? To say, maybe it has all the answers, but they're not. Some of them are not going to be easy to find. Some of them are going to leave you, in this place where it's like, could be this, it could also be that. Can it be both? And this is one of those cases where I'm left at this point in my understanding to say somehow both are happening. Somehow God is choosing, and the burden is also on us to choose, and it's a mystery how that works. It's this is one of those moments for teachers. We don't want to look like we don't have the answers. I mean, that's kind of what teachers do, right? They provide answers. And so this is where we feel like we got to come up with something, and so we might pick a side. In this case, this is one of those where to be honest, I have to say, looking at this, there are both sides of this issue, whether or not God's choosing or we're choosing, or is it somehow both? To pick a side there, I think would be dishonest of me. And so just to say, this is one of those mysteries of the faith, and it's been one forever, by the way. It's not just something I've decided is a mystery because I can't figure it out. For hundreds of years, it's really been one of those big issues, in the church that people are trying to sort out: does God choose us, or we choose Him? Along with, can you lose your salvation, or is it secured? And so those kinds of questions, leave a bit of a mystery. And I think we have to learn to embrace that, because it's strange to me when I start to think of it. What makes us think that we could sort God out? That even though He's disclosed a lot of things to us, what makes us think that we could know His ways? I mean, that's something the Old Testament says, right? And neither are my ways your ways. And yet here we are thinking, some of us, and I'm guilty of it, thinking at times, I can sort out your ways. I know how, like last week when I said, I've been preaching forever, and I still hold to this, that God begins with the earthly and moves to the heavenly. He begins with the natural, moves to the supernatural. And then last week, Jesus was talking about the earthly, about the bread, and then he went to the heavenly, about he's the bread from heaven. Then he brought it back to the earthly again with eat my flesh and drink my. And I'm like, oh, what happened to that formula? God's like, I love messing with formulas. You guys are so funny with your formulas. And this is another one of those formulas we'd love to have, is God either does all the choosing and then you just settle into that, or we do all the choosing and settle into that. And I think this is one of those, like, there's mystery to this, that somehow we're certainly mankind's involved, and these scriptures point out over and over again that God does plenty of choosing. And so anyway, with that then, it says that these disciples then turn away. Many of them turn away, as Hebrews puts it, drift away, fall away. Then Jesus says to the 12, do you also want to go away? Peter gives a great answer here in verse 68. Answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Also we have come to believe and know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So this is Peter's moment where he understands. Maybe he's understood for a little while, but this is his chance to verbalize it. You are the Christ. I've decided that I'm in agreement with John 1:1, which wasn't written yet. But that from the beginning you were the Word, and you were with God, and you were God. This is Peter's moment of saying, no matter, even if this is crazy talk coming out of you right now, even if this is something that we're complaining about, murmuring about, and everybody else wants to leave, I don't know where else I could go for answers. You are so clearly the Christ. You are clearly the one who's come from God, who's doing the things that you're doing. Who else could do those? Who else could do such things? Nicodemus and others have been thinking about this too. So this is Peter's big moment of faith. Peter's often remembered for his 3 moments of denying Jesus, but this was a strong, non-denying moment from Peter, kind of midway through Jesus's ministry. I'm going to talk more about this, I think, here in a little bit, but just to bring it up now while we're here, I've had these moments too, where you're struggling with God, struggling with faith, struggling with what's it all about, and then you come back to this bottom line. I've come back to it a number of times, saying, but he is God. Jesus is God. I believe, that he did die on the cross. I do believe it was for the sins of the world. I do believe he was resurrected. It was witnesses after witnesses after witnesses willing to give their lives for this testimony that they saw him. I believe. And this is Peter's moment, and he probably had other moments. We know the one where he fails, where he denies, but he probably had other moments of going through and going, oh boy, this thing was pretty exciting, at Pentecost, but now this feels like ministry. This feels like the grind. Am I really into this? And it's like, but he is the Christ, and it's true he's not here right now turning water into wine and walking on water and doing all the things he was doing when he was here, but he's still who he's still there. We have his Spirit, and it's different than it used to be. We can't touch Jesus like we used to. John comments in another one of his books, we held him, we had our hands on the guy. That's how intimate we were with him, and now he's gone, and now it's different. We have his Spirit, but he's still there, and then there's this faith battle. I'm going to talk about that, I think, a little bit more later, but this is Peter's big moment, and it's a beautiful moment. It's a moment I keep coming to in my life too, to say he is the Christ, and there's no getting away from that. No matter what questions I may have, no matter what doubts or struggles or whatever else I may be having, I keep coming back to that bottom line. And so I would encourage you at this point, is that your bottom line? This is a time to be honest. There's probably no more important question to answer is, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? Do you believe in who he says he is? Do you believe that he came from the Father, that he always was? If not, this is the time to work through that. Say, well, why not? Why don't I believe that? What's holding me up? And if you believe, this is the time to celebrate. remind yourself, as Peter's doing out loud, and the other disciples, hey, this guy may be doing, that may have been some crazy talk there about the flesh and blood. I don't get it. But what are we going to do? This is the Christ, right? And they're like, yes. Okay, so we've got to stick with him, right? Yes. And not understanding is then on us. There's something we're not getting. There's nothing wrong with him. There's something wrong with our understanding at this point. And that's where Peter is with it. So Jesus answers, did I not choose you? There he goes, right? Choosing. Did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is a devil? He spoke of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for it was he who would betray him, being one of the 12. Now this is the first time we hear of Judas in the book of John. He's introduced as the betrayer. It's not how you want, if somebody's, writing a book about you or you're involved in a story, you don't want to come in that way, do you? As the bad guy. That's the first mention of you. No mention of the fact that, Judas was also maybe the best cook of the bunch. Then get their big catches of fish, and maybe Judas really had a great recipe. And he was good with those seasonings. I remember when I stayed in Jerusalem, we stayed at a hostel, and we all had to take turns cooking. And, I bought some chicken and some vegetables, and so I was kind of, doing some chicken. And then there were like shelves with seasonings. I dumped all kinds of stuff on there. I didn't know what I was doing. It came out really salty. It was terrible. But anyway, there's no mention here of anything Judas ever did. Maybe he'd done really well in high school. I know they didn't have high school, but you know what I mean. There's nothing else about Judas except that he was the one who would betray Jesus. That's all we get about him, and it's a somber note about Judas. But we know as a reader now, if we're a first-time reader of John, this is where we're going with this story. It's the dun 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 moment. The Judas is going to be the one who betrays him, and John has been using that metaphor of light and dark all throughout. Light is belief and darkness is unbelief. And he notes in John 14, when Judas leaves the group, leaves the Passover meal to go and betray Jesus, when the moment actually happens, we're not there yet, but when we get there, John is the one who points out it was night. Judas left the group to betray Jesus. It was night. Does it matter that it was night? I mean, why is John including that? Of course it matters to John, because night is darkness. And it's just another way for John to point out Judas was in unbelief. He did what he did out of unbelief. And that's where Judas was with it. So that's the main issue there throughout the Gospel of John. It's not so much about whether people are saints or sinners, whether people are doing more good than bad. It's about whether you believe or you don't believe. And that's the question everybody has to wrestle with. Not whether or not you're getting most of it right, or if you're really, one of those bad people, then God's not happy with you. It's just like, do you believe that he's the Christ, or do you not believe? And then what happens after that is going to be something you're going to be working out with God, for the rest of your life. But that's the main issue. And that's what we're going to see as we go through the rest of the book. So, question of the day here, okay? It wasn't about whether or not God chooses. That's a fun question. It's not the question for us today. Here's what I want to bring up, because this whole crowd walk away from Jesus. And maybe at this point, we're not talking about necessarily walking away from Jesus. But I had a song I wrote, like 18 years ago. I was writing a lot of songs back then. I was really inspired, and I wrote one called "There Is No Way." There is no way, there is no way, there is no way I could ever leave you. And it was my song to Jesus. If I were writing it today, I would write it from his perspective. He would never leave us. But at the time I meant this song. I've come to you, my eyes have been opened, I've been living like an idiot, living like a fool, and now I believe you are the Christ, and so I want to live life your way. I want to follow you, is what we call that. I want to know you. I want, to abide in you, is how we term it as we go through John here. So I write this song, "There's no way I could ever leave you." Little did I know then, how easy it would later be for me to sleep in than to pray. Little did I know then how easy it would be for me, and I kind of started picking up on this as I went through seminary. When you go through seminary, you got to read a lot of books. And the Bible isn't one of them. It's not required reading for most classes. It's, you know, it's a assumption that you've read it and that you are reading it. But they have you read all these books. And little did I know, you know, Jesus, there's no way I could ever leave you, that I would find it easier at many points to read books about the scriptures than to sit and read the scriptures. Especially once, you know, I'd read them a number of times. To read books that are talking about Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. Then to sit and read through 1 Corinthians again. Okay, I know what happens next. Okay, yeah, and then chapter 5, expel the immoral brother, do not sue one another. But to read books about those things, how much easier it would be for me to do that. Is that necessarily leaving Jesus? No, and I don't think that's my concern. But there was a time when I was fired up for Jesus. There was a time when I couldn't stay out of our church, Northwest Baptist. I had to be there. You know, whatever was going on, I've told those stories, you know, prayer meetings and potlucks we hadn't been invited to, but they were sweet to us and let us come and hang out. We're in our mid-20s. And they just, you know, they took us in because, you know, we wanted to be there. What's going on at the church? That's the place. It's close to Jesus, and that's where I want to be. That was my feeling at the time anyway. And, you know, where did that enthusiasm go? You know, to be honest, because there was something sparking there. I gotta do this. I'm so excited. You know, getting up and getting that cup of coffee and praying and reading the scriptures wasn't optional. It was something I could hardly help but do. I was so driven to do those things, excited to do those things. You know, at the time, of course, the scriptures were new to me, and so it was a page turner because I didn't know what would happen next. You know, and I didn't understand that Psalm 86 had nothing to do with Psalm 85. It wasn't a follow-up. It wasn't the sequel. But even so, just you know, those things being so new and fresh and exciting and everything coming at you for the first time, and these scriptures, you know, that I've since called coffee mug verses, but you read these things and it sticks out to you and you highlight it and something you didn't know before, and now there's a hope that wasn't there and an excitement that wasn't there, and there's this freshness and you know, and you go for a while, and then there can be a time where you go, okay, yeah, I've been riding this train, you know, I hopped on this bandwagon, and I still believe it's the bandwagon to be on. There's no, you know, like I said, I always come back to that bottom line. I'm not jumping off this bandwagon. I'm not getting off this train. But there are times when you kind of sit and you're just on the train. Yeah, I'm on the train, you know. I follow Jesus. You followed? Yeah, I follow Jesus, you know. But that enthusiasm, like, where did it go? Where did that excitement go? You know, this crowd were so excited for Jesus. They were going to make him king of Israel, you know, and they're following him across the lake, and they can't wait to hear what he has to say next. And then he says a few things, and they're gone, you know. Where did that enthusiasm go? And it can happen. It can happen. You can. It's like it gets set, you know, like I set it in a drawer, you know, along with my Michael W. Smith CDs. You know, put it away somehow. And my concern, what I'm talking about here, is not belief versus unbelief. It's about that, you know, we talk about sometimes that fire. And there's even a song, Light the Fire Again. I think it's Brian Dirksen with Vineyard. Light the Fire Again. And the reason that song comes about and it still gets sung in churches is because many of us can readily identify with that song. Yeah, I'm here at church. I made it. And yeah, you know, next week is my rotation to teach children's church. And I'll do it. I will do it. You know, I signed up for it, and I'll do it. And I still love Jesus. But, you know, that song hits us. It's like, light that fire again, Lord. Get me to that place again where I'm That's another one. These songs are coming out. You know, Delirious, Lead Me to the Cross where we first met. You know, take me back to that time when everything was new and fresh and exciting, and I was fired up. You know, where did that enthusiasm go? And again, here's this crowd who are enthusiastic one day and just walk away the next. The battle's real, folks. And if you haven't experienced this battle in your walk with Jesus yet, you're maybe, you know, still new. It took me a number of years before I hit anything like this. Or you're just a really good Christian. And I part of me is being sarcastic about that, but another part of me is saying, you know what? We have some really good Christians at the Crossing Church. You know, some of you, you know, I so much admire, because your walk of faith seems to be so solid, and you know, you're steady in your faith. But to say for many of us that battle is real. Of yeah, I'm gonna walk with Jesus, but we lose that fire, we lose that enthusiasm, we lose that excitement. The battle to endure, to finish the race, right? That's what we went through in the book of Hebrews, to keep running. And there's one you know, there's one level of it which is sticking around at all. And I'm not even talking about that today. That's a thing. You know, you know, some people do just drop out altogether, but I'm not talking about dropping out. I'm talking about those of us who will stick with it, but we can lose that joy, that enthusiasm for what we're doing, that drive. You know, I'm motivated by Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. We can become motivated by whatever else it is. It's, you know, duty, D-U-T-Y, you know, here's what I have to do. You know, I signed up to do this. I signed up to minister to people. I signed up to, you know, lead this ministry or be a part of that ministry, or to, you know, teach the kids, be on the praise team, be a welcomer, whatever it is. You know, I signed up to serve. I will do it, you know. But we can lose that. How do we get that back? That's a real struggle. And I don't know that there's here again, as a teacher, you want to offer up all the solutions. You know, the easiest solutions, and what I mean by easy is they're easy to say, is, you know, we need to pray more, we need to read the Bible more. So that would be the first thing, is, you know, talk to people. Well, are you reading the Bible, or are you praying? The reason that I suggest to be an easy solution is because that's not always the answer. For some, that may be the answer. It's like, well, are you really abiding, you know, in this case? Are you really talking to him? And, you know, we call that prayer. Are you talking to him? Are you reading the scriptures and trying to understand what he wants, who he is, and what he wants for you? Well, no. Okay, well, you need to do those things. But for some people, that's not the solution, because that's just religion. And so, and I've struggled with that too. I think I've shared with you guys about that before. But where, you know, sitting down with that cup of coffee and that I'm going to do prayer and I'm going to read the scriptures just becomes religious. It's just what you do because you feel you have to, and you can almost feel your motivation becomes, well, won't God be mad at me if I don't? Or you know, what, things are going okay now. If I stop this, are things going to fall apart? It can become even a, you know, an exercise in like you know, mental. I don't know what you call that, but just trying to sort some things out like that, and so that's not always the solution for everybody. But what I'd suggest today is to say, first of all, if you're struggling with your walk with Jesus, like either it's dry, or, you know, even bigger, you're questioning and doubting. You need to talk to somebody about that. Here's my suggestion of the day is find somebody you trust, and that's important. Find somebody you can trust with this and go to them. Sadly, many people don't feel they can trust others in the church, other Christians, with this kind of a thing, because their fear is they'll be judged, right? And like I said, first thing, you know, many of us would be thinking, well, they're probably not reading their Bible. We're probably not praying. I haven't seen him on Zoom prayer, And we've already, quick to throw out the reasons why they're struggling and doubting God, or struggling in their walk with him, or it's grown cold. And so sadly, rightly so, many people don't feel that they can talk to other believers about this, but that's the wrongest thing, and so some people will turn to the world because they can at least find a listening ear, somebody who won't, be quick to point out their errors. And so my first suggestion is, if that's you, find somebody you feel you can trust and go to them with this. Open up about it. Second thing is, if you are on the other end of that and you're the listening ear, be just that. And I've said this before, be that listening ear without throwing out the quick suggestions. Here's what you got to do. Get started on this. Here's this Bible study by Beth Moore. You just got to do this because it changed my life. May be true and it may be helpful. But initially, people just need to know they've been heard and that they can get that out there in the open and say, I am struggling. I used to be loving this whole thing and I believe in Jesus, but I just don't feel, everybody's into this song, Sunday morning and excited about, and I was just sitting there and not feeling it. Or, people were really excited about the sermon, but I just thought it was long and boring and I'm not getting anything out of it anymore and I just don't connect. And just listen as they share that. So there's, two parts to that. If you're the one struggling, be sure you tell somebody. And if you're going to be that person on the other end, make sure you are a good listener, so that they feel that they've been heard, and that the first words out of your mouth aren't going to be those quick snap judgments that we can sadly be so famous for. Let God work there. Let the Spirit work there. Trusting in our gifts. And sometimes we talked about spiritual gifts. Sometimes it's the time to say something, and sometimes he wants you to wait on that. And so you just got to be open to what he wants you to do there. But we've got to be able to talk to people. And so this is what it means to be the church. We are the group who walk, it says on our website something to this effect, but we are walking this journey with Jesus together. And the journey, as I've shared, has ups and downs. And so what we have to be ready to do and mindful about is when people are on the down end, okay, they're down in the valley of the shadow of death, and they're walking through it. We've got to be those who help pick them up and carry them along. We don't want to be those who leave them behind. That's one of the sad statements people have said about Christianity, and it's not just Christianity, but other groups have done this too. But is that we so often shoot our wounded, and the wounded in this case are people who are struggling in their faith, people who have questions that they're legitimate questions. And I've tried to have us be a church that can be open to that, even during sermon times. When we went through the Jesus lens, of course, lots of questions came up there. Legit stuff. What do we do with this violence and this? I really want to follow Jesus, but the God of the Old Testament seems like this monster. That's a legit struggle for people, and the church needs to be the place that they can still be a part of, even as they struggle through that. As I talked about last week, we can't be the group that casts people out because they're having doubts, because they're struggling, because their love's grown cold and they just don't, they're not feeling it anymore. And so, all the more we need to embrace and be gentle. Jesus was the one who said, "A bruised reed he will not break," right? In the Old Testament said that of him. A bruised reed he will not break. And so we have to be the same way, don't we? In order to be followers of Jesus, we can't go around breaking bruised reeds. And bruised reeds at this point, what I'm talking about are people who are struggling in their faith, or they're having doubts, or they're questioning some things that they hadn't questioned before, and it's raising concerns, or God hasn't answered their prayer in this way, or they've been in pain for a long time, and if God loved me, wouldn't he heal me? And these are real things, and we've got to learn to walk with each other through it, and the church is the place for that to happen. I don't mean a building, of course. I mean the people have to be available to one another. And so that's my prayer for us, is that we would continue to be that church. And I think we're doing a great job with it in many ways. I talk about this stuff. I'm preaching to the choir, aren't I? because you guys are like, well, you've said this before, and we're doing this, and I agree with this. One is just a reminder to say, one of those times, people might be struggling with different things, and certainly through this pandemic, it's hitting everybody differently, and for some of us, it's a breeze, and others of us, it's the most difficult time we've had in our lives, maybe. And we've got to figure out how to pick each other up and carry each other along across that finish line. Sometimes it's our turn to be carried, and sometimes we've got to carry others. That was Jesus' prayer for Peter. If you remember, he told Peter, hey, I've been praying for you, buddy. Satan wants to sift you. He wants to tempt you. He wants to break you down. He wants to take you down, buddy, but I've been praying that you won't fail. And after that, I'm praying that you will then strengthen your brothers. And that's what Peter was able to do, through Pentecost and things like that, after that point. And that's the same prayer for all of us, is that we won't fail, we won't turn away, fall away, drift away. But then after that, we may have to be carried through that process by others. And then we can be strengthened and ready to then be the ones who will help carry others through it. And so I want us to be that church. I want to be part of that. Sometimes there's, the minister is the one who is seen as the one who's carrying people through things. But there are other times, certainly when we need to be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I need to be carried. And I've done that. And I've had a number of you help carry me through. And I praise God for those experiences, and I thank you for it. And that's what it means. That's the real deal, isn't it? And just being open and willing for us all to be a part of that. I think that in and of itself sometimes can warm up that love that may have gone cold, to see the love of Christ through each other as we express that to each other, especially through difficulties, especially through doubts and struggles. So I'm praying that we can be that church and trusting God with that process. Amen. Amen.